Glory to God in the highest.
Hi, thanks for tuning in again to our daily inspiration. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And hopefully you'll find this video both useful and edifying. Well, for this video, what I'd like to do is share something from Father Carlos Martins for the first half of this video. And later on, for the second half of this video, is going to be about the lives of the saints again. And one of the reasons why I decided to share this clip of Father Carlos Martins here with you is because, for many years before I struggled with forgiving those who hurt me, I cannot seem to find it within me to forgive what they did to me. And every time I recalled what they did, I just felt angry just at the thought of it. And it was not until I decided to forgive them that the memories of what they did cause any anger within me anymore. Sure, I still remember what they did, and probably I won't be able to forget them. However, I do not feel angry anymore whenever I recalled any of those bad memories again.
Easily, one of the most difficult things that the Christian life calls us to is to forgiveness. And yet, that is a non-negotiable. Jesus says repeatedly, over and over in the New Testament, unless you forgive, you will not be forgiven. Right? Unless you forgive, you will not be forgiven. And in fact, he goes even further and says the measure with which you forgive is the measure which your Heavenly Father is going to forgive you. Right? If we are stingy with forgiveness, then that is what we are going to receive in turn. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want God to be stingy with me in forgiveness. I don't want it. And so I have personally made it a mark years ago to zero in on this part of the spiritual life and work at it, because I found forgiveness very difficult. Now, I'll give you one example. When I was in seminary, I was inside the house of formation in which I lived. I had just come back from a hunting trip. So I'd been rabbit hunting with some friends and members of my family. And so I was cleaning my shotgun. It was about 8:30 p.m. at night. It was winter time, so that it was already dark. I heard my car door close outside. I was the only one who had a key to my car. And so I look outside, and there's this big, enormous guy in my car, and I could see him lighting up a crack pipe. I could see him smoking drugs in my car, at the same time looking to see if there was anything that he could steal. And so I have my shotgun in my hand. And so I'm thinking, I am not going to go out there with my shotgun. How would this look? A seminarian goes out and confronts a thief with a shotgun. So put the shotgun down. And I go outside, and I yell at him to leave. And so he did. He took off. By that time, I had yelled in the house for somebody to call the police because of what was happening. So by the time I got down the stairs and went outside, there had to have been a police cruiser in the neighborhood. So he was very close by. And when I confronted him, the cruiser was already turning the corner. I could already see him. Anyway, the guy took off, ran, and he got away. He was never caught. He jumped over. He was high, so he couldn't feel any pain whatsoever. He jumped over a bunch of fences, and the fences he couldn't jump over, he just ran right through them. And so he was never found. But for him to get inside my car, he had stuck a screwdriver in the lock and pried it off. And then he could just manually flip the switch, and then he could access my car. That's how he got into my car. Which meant that my lock, my door, was now broken and non-functional. So it would never, after he did what he did, it would never open again externally. And so to get into my car, I had to get in through the passenger side and crawl over the stick shift. I had a manual transmission car, and then into the driver's seat. The inconvenience and the irritation that would cause me was enormous. I mean, my car was the cheapest car on the street. It was like 13, 14 years old. I mean, if you wanted to steal from a car, that ought to have been the last car that you would have picked. It was in the parking lot of a seminary. There was absolutely nothing to steal in the inside of that car but dust, if you wanted dust. There was lots of it. But that inconvenience, it enraged me. And every time I thought about it, I was enraged. And because I was in seminary, I didn't have the money to go fix my car door. So every day that I needed my car, I had to go through the routine of getting in through the passenger side and letting myself into the driver's seat through the passenger side. And after about a week or 10 days of just having these episodes of just rage within me, I became aware of a change that had occurred in me. So we begin every day. I began every day back then, and I still do now, with an hour of personal prayer. But for that period of 10 days, I couldn't remember a single moment of my prayer time. In other words, the rage was so much that it had consumed everything spiritual within me. So no matter how much I tried to be spiritual and connect with the Lord, as long as I had that, this rage was consuming everything. And so it was keeping me away from the Lord. And so what I did was I petitioned the Lord. I said, Lord, how do I find a way out of this? And then an awareness came to me in that prayer time. And I heard a word from the Lord. And the Lord said, I gave you this thief. This is your good thief. This is my good thief. The guy ruined my door. The guy, I mean, the effects of his crime I encounter multiple times a day. But those were the words of the Lord, and he said nothing else beyond that. And so I had to make a choice. I either accept what the Lord just said to me, or I reject it, and I have to live with the consequences. So I chose to accept them, and I started to pray for that thief. Wherever he was in the world, I started to pray for him. I offered up all of my prayer times, my liturgy of the hours, my rosary, the communions that I would receive in Mass. And eventually I got to, not only did the rage leave, but I got to a point where I was so pleased what I saw in me, something new happening, a spirit of forgiveness, that I actually started to thank God for what that guy did to my car. Because I would have never encountered the place that I was in had he not done that. In other words, in a way that I never expected and never imagined, that crack addict, that thief, whom I would have never given a second thought to before he broke into my car, he was an instrument of God. God chose him as an instrument to bring me into a completely different place in my spiritual life. And so I started to thank God profusely for, and I still do periodically. It's been years now. It's been something in the neighborhood of 14, 15 years. But I still pray for him. And I still thank the Lord for what he did to my car. Because the lesson that I learned about forgiveness has completely altered my life. And so forgiveness is one of the most difficult things we'll do. And often when we get hurt by somebody, and there is nobody who has not been hurt by somebody, there is nobody for whom forgiveness is not at least partially difficult. But forgiveness is a choice. It's a decision. It's not a feeling. So you may forgive, as I did, as I forgave my good thief, and the rage is still within you. The rage is an emotion, and you cannot control your emotions. What you can control, though, is your decision to forgive. Right? I mean, our Lord, as he was dying on the cross with his body pierced, broken, bruised, and with the life being suffocated out of it, I guarantee you he didn't feel like forgiving. The act of forgiveness of the Son of God was not a good feeling that he had. In fact, what he felt was the exact opposite of it. But his love was so great that his decision was solidified by that superabundant love. And that was enough for him. Our Lord was willing to undertake all of the pain, all of the brokenheartedness, all of the rejection and the loneliness that he did, right? To suffer all the crimes that we committed against him, all for the sake of forgiveness. Because at the level of his will, inside his heart, he wanted to forgive. Right? And how can we not imitate that? And so regardless of what our emotions tell us, we need to make a decision to forgive. And we need to keep doing that. Every time the emotion comes up, the bitterness, the gall, and it's fine. You can't control that. So you're not sinning by experiencing that. But every time it does, you just renew that act of forgiveness. No, I reject you. I reject you, bitterness. I reject you, pain. Lord, I ask you to forgive that person as I do now. Bless that person. Bless the one who hurt me. Bless all of the other people who have hurt me. Lord, I hold nothing against them. From my heart, I choose to forgive. And what will happen is over time, it might take a day, 3 days, 45 days, 1,678 days. But those emotions will leave because they cannot be fed by your heart anymore. Your heart will be so filled with grace and will be so vacant of rancor that bitterness can no longer live within it.
And now for the second part of this video, again, just like before, we'd like to use this space to talk about one of the saints of the church. And hopefully, you'll learn something here, and if there's any feedback or suggestion at the end of this, please let us know in the comments below.
Saint Bernadette was 14 when she was out with her younger sister and a friend, looking for firewood to sell in exchange for bread. Her two companions waded across a stream and left her taking off her shoes and stockings. Suddenly, she saw a figure in the opening of a grotto. It looked to her like a beautiful young lady of 15 or 16, surrounded by light and holding a rosary. Instinctively, Bernadette pulled out her own rosary and began to pray. When she finished her prayers, the lady bowed, smiled at her, and disappeared. On the way home, Bernadette asked her companions whether they had seen anything. They had seen nothing, but her sister pressed her to tell them what she had seen. Reluctantly, she admitted seeing a beautiful young lady dressed in white, with a blue sash and a yellow rose on each foot. When her sister told their mother, they were both punished, and Bernadette was forbidden to return to the cave. On the Saturday, Bernadette went to confession and told Abbé Pomian what she had witnessed. He merely advised her to wait and see. When word got around, however, local children urged Bernadette to go back to Massabielle. Her father agreed, but told her to be quick. Back at the grotto, Bernadette knelt down and started to say the rosary. She had barely finished 1 decade when she exclaimed, "Look, the light! She's there!" The other children could see nothing. Bernadette got to her feet and sprinkled holy water all round the wild rosebush in front of her, saying, "If you come from God, stay. If not, go away." The lady smiled, bowing her head. Bernadette went into a trance and could not be moved. An adult was fetched who finally managed to get her away. When asked what she saw, she said, "I see a lovely young lady with a rosary on her arm." Bernadette habitually referred to the lady as Aquero, meaning that one. At the request of 2 ladies, she asked Aquero to write down her name. The lady laughed and said, "That is not necessary," and also then said, "Will you do me the favor of coming here every day for a fortnight?" "If my parents will let me," Bernadette answered, and she was then told by the lady, "I do not promise to make you happy in this world, but I will in the next." On the 21st of February, the police became involved because rumors spreading around were creating an atmosphere of excitement. An inspector even asked Bernadette to promise not to go back to the grotto. But Bernadette, in response, said, "Monsieur, I have promised the lady to go back." The next day, after being forbidden to return by both her parents, she felt an overwhelming urge to go to the grotto and skip school in order to do so. But the lady didn't appear, and she was distraught. How have I failed her? Clearly, the lady disapproved of her disobedience. On the 23rd of February, after her parents had relented, Bernadette ran back to Massabielle and was again favored with a vision. A woman watching Bernadette wrote. Her face was transfigured by an expression of joy, happiness, and delight. Another pinched her and pricked her shoulder with a hat pin, but the girl did not even flinch. A candle she was holding appeared to burn her finger, but subsequently there was no trace of blistering. The next day, Bernadette was seen walking on her knees to the back of the cave, continually kissing the ground, explaining later that Aquero had said, "Penance. Pray to God for sinners. Kiss the ground in penance." The following day, Bernadette was observed stooping over a muddy patch of earth, scraping at it until water appeared. She drank from it, muddying her face so that she looked revolting. She was led away, and the watching crowd, indignant at the spectacle, left in disgust. The lady had told her, "Go to the spring and drink and wash." That afternoon, people returning to the cave found a small spring and filled bottles with water to take home, and the daily visions continued. Then, on the 2nd of March, Bernadette was given a message for the clergy. The lady asked for a procession to take place and for a chapel to be built on the site. Advised of this, the parish priest insisted scornfully that she should ask this lady what her name was. When Bernadette conveyed this message, she received only a smile. And so the parish priest later commented, "If she wants the chapel, let her tell you her name and make the wild rose flower at the grotto." On the 4th of March, a crowd of 3,000 to 4,000 assembled at the grotto, believing that this would be the occasion of the last apparition. They half expected to see the rose flower, but they were left disappointed. Bernadette received no vision that morning, and everyone left. But Bernadette was persuaded to return at lunchtime and saw her vision once again. It seemed Aquero had been upset by the improper behavior of certain people in the cave the previous night. On the 25th of March, Bernadette felt the familiar, irresistible urge to go to the grotto. Aquero appeared immediately and stayed for an hour. After being asked her name 4 times, she looked up to heaven and said simply, "I am the Immaculate Conception." It meant nothing to Bernadette, who went straight back to the parish priest's house with her aunt, repeating the words to herself, lest she forget them. And when they burst in on him, she said, "I am the Immaculate Conception." The priest was speechless and sent her home. He was later to become her staunchest ally. When word got round, the people of Lourdes were not surprised, having believed all along that it was the Blessed Virgin appearing at the grotto. The authorities were still not sure what to do. Visitors to the grotto were turning it into a shrine, and official action was set in motion to close it down to the public. Claims of cures were made by the relatives of those who had bathed in the spring. On the 7th of April, Bernadette returned to Massabielle and once again spoke with the lady. A local doctor, known to be a skeptic, witnessed her hands being exposed to the flame of the large candle she was holding, and was amazed to find no trace of scorching. The grotto was closed, but barriers erected were repeatedly torn down by the townsfolk. On the 16th of July, Bernadette visited an area close to the grotto and saw Our Lady for the last time. Aquero said nothing, but appeared more beautiful than ever. It was the 18th apparition. Now, before we get to the end, let's talk a little bit more about Saint Bernadette. She was born on the 7th of January, 1844. Her family was poor, and for much of her childhood, they were forced to live in a single basement room. It was dark, damp, and smelly, and Bernadette developed asthma at an early age. Her aunt and her former foster mother provided the family with some relief by taking the child to live with them for long periods, but in return insisted that Bernadette, instead of attending school, should look after their children. When Bernadette returned home, she was kept busy looking after her younger sister and 2 brothers. Thus she missed out on her schooling, and for a long time was unable to learn how to read and write. It caused some people to regard her as stupid, but as her behavior during and after the apparition showed, she had plenty of sturdy common sense and on occasions a lively personality. Although her inability to read and write prevented her from learning her catechism, delaying her first communion, Bernadette imbibed her faith from those around her, and was completely familiar with the rosary she carried with her everywhere. Like the general population of the area, she had a simple but rugged faith in God. It was typical of her that when she first saw the lady in the grotto, she instinctively pulled out her rosary and began to pray. At the time of the vision she experienced at Massabielle, Bernadette revealed two sides to her character. Humbly aware of her family's poverty and her own backwardness, she was extremely modest and respectful in her manner. On the other hand, she was invariably straightforward, honest, and direct when interviewed, never embroidering her accounts. She recoiled in horror when people tried to press money into her hand, and was scornful of those urging her to bless their rosaries. "I don't have a purple stole," she reminded them. When a visiting bishop offered to exchange his gold-mounted rosary for hers, she thanked him, but said quite firmly that she preferred her own. Her simple, straightforward manner impressed all who had dealings with her. One imagines that her utter joy in experiencing visions of Our Lady must have given her added confidence. In addition, the people of Lourdes and numerous visitors from elsewhere made a great fuss of her. On one occasion, when she had finally escaped the crowds by taking refuge in a sympathetic neighbor's house, she crept home in the dark to her bed, answering her mother's query as to how she felt, with a sigh. In January 1862, the bishop announced the church's belief that Mary, the Immaculate Mother of God, had in fact appeared to Bernadette, and that certain cures had taken place at Lourdes for which there was no natural explanation. Bernadette herself was now living in the local hospice run by nuns. Her family, with the help of relatives and friends, had moved into more suitable accommodation. When the bishop visited the hospice and suggested it was time for her to consider getting married, she replied, "As for that, no way." When he then proposed entry to a convent, she regretted that as well as always being ill, she was too poor to provide the customary dowry, adding, "Besides, I know nothing and am good for nothing." But in 1866, she eventually entered the convent, and she later went on, became the convent's sacristan, creating beautiful embroidery for altar cloths and vestments. However, in 1872, Bernadette's health deteriorated again, and for a time she was confined to her room. Bernadette developed tuberculosis of the bone in the right knee, a most painful condition which she bore stoically. The name Bernadette means brave as a bear, and she certainly lived up to it. Not surprisingly, she was universally loved and admired by the community she lived among, with the possible exception of the mistress of novices. The end came on Wednesday, the 16th of April, 1879. Bernadette asked to be lifted from her bed. After making her last confession, she recited the prayer for the dying. She asked for a drink of water, made the sign of the cross, bowed her head, and died. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She was just 35. She was not buried in the town cemetery, as the Mother Superior insisted on keeping her within the convent walls in a vault constructed in the secluded oratory. And 30 years after her death, her body was exhumed. There was no trace of corruption, though her crucifix was tarnished by verdigris and her rosary corroded with rust, proving that damp existed within the coffin. 10 years later, the body was exhumed again and once more revealed no sign of corruption. And so, after all these, Bernadette's mortal remains were placed in a casket of gilded bronze and crystal in a chapel where all can still see her today.
Well then, that will be all for the video this time. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And hopefully all of you have learned a lot from this video. Again, remember, if there's any feedback or suggestion, please let us know in the comments below. Until the next one, thanks again for watching and may God bless you.